Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, and Jim Seibert, in the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jim Seibert. Along with my co-hosts and friends, Mike Bohan and Kenny Ray, welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, the podcast for drivers, for safety directors. We are happy that you are here. We welcome you. And today we've got a special guest along with us. Chief Warrant Officer 5, Greg Reicks, will be joining us from the Nebraska Army National Guard, where he is the state safety director. The topic of today is red, white, and watch out, military rigs on the road. And we're going to be discussing this time of year, which annual trainings for both the Army National Guard and the Air National Guard. There's a lot of different rigs that we don't normally encounter on the road. And so we've brought Mr. Reicks on board today to kind of talk about those military convoys and just provide us some general distinctions and remarks and some actions that we can take as driving tractor trailer combos or our civilian vehicles around up and down, and what we can expect when we encounter these. So welcome to the podcast, Mr. Reicks. Can you, for those listeners that don't know, Chief Warrant Officer 5 is kind of a big deal, like a really big deal in the military. Being prior military and just a extreme patriot, sometimes to a fault, we always looked at, and I was an officer and an enlisted man at different times in my career, and the warrant officer, it's a mythical creature. It's the unicorn of the uniformed service. And that is because they are such technical experts that they have chosen a career path that focuses them in very, very specific and limited lanes within the military. So, Mr. Reicks, tell us and the listeners a little bit about how your career started, if you would.
Well, good morning, Jim. Thanks for the good introduction. Very, very flattering. That gets you everywhere. I appreciate that. And I appreciate your service, sir, being a retired major. So I appreciate what you've done, and you get to share that message and help other people understand this, and then draw people like me into this. So hopefully we can help others that are out there. So yeah. So as a warrant officer, sometimes it's just kind of the folks that stick around the longest to reach these ranks. But no, I joined the Army before my senior year in high school. Didn't think college was probably in my future immediately, and didn't have really a specific career path in mind. But so join the military, like a lot of us do, it's an honorable profession, and it's an opportunity to serve our country, travel the world, get an education, and kind of figure out what we want to do. I spent 5 years on active duty, spent some time down in Fort Riley, Kansas, and then went over to South Korea for 3 years, and this is during the Gulf War time. So I got stuck over in Korea, which was a fantastic tour over there. So spent that time 5 years, got out of the military in the early 90s, joined the Army National Guard as an enlisted guy. I'm a diesel mechanic by trade. So in the maintenance community, enlisted guys, we work in a motor pool, but often there's warrant officers that are Jim, to your point, they're kind of subject matter technical experts in maintenance. So many of the warrant officers that we have in the state, a higher percentage are actually aviators. So if you've ever met a warrant officer out there, we're either subject matter experts in a logistical field or we're aviators. I'm not an aviator. And we always joke about the aviators. If you want to know which one of the warrant officers are aviators, just wait a little bit. They'll tell you that they're pilots.
That's really funny, and I really thought you were going to go, hey, you're going to see the aviators versus the other guys by the uniform that they're wearing or by the aviator sunglasses. So your career started, like many of ours, in a different sector than you are now. And so I would imagine that young E1 or E2 private Greg Reicks at the time would not have envisioned becoming the top tier, the solid bar, which is the CW5. How did, over your career, how did you morph into the state safety officer? And how long have you held that position? And if you would, some of the details that a state safety officer does when it pertains to these military movements.
Good question, Jim. You had kind of alluded to, subject matter experts, where we pick a lane, we pick a profession, and we call it a stovepipe career, where we start at the bottom, work our way through, and we just jump right in, and we are the master of that trade. Mine was a little more unorthodox than that. As I mentioned, a diesel mechanic by trade, and then jumped over a little bit of heating and air conditioning and some hydraulics and air conditioning and some fire extinguisher, things like that. But in the military, as I'm familiar with, there's always a lot of additional duties that come up. Either you're a food service officer, or you're the safety officer, or you're the unit movement officer. These things are additional duties, and those additional duties kind of I took a liking to a couple of those. So I was the unit movement officer in doing these convoys, and we line up the convoys. We get a hold of the defense movement coordinator, and we schedule how we're going to move, and then we're that convoy commander as we move down the roads. And I kind of took a liking to that, and then that morphed into a full-time job as the defense movement coordinator in transportation. So that side job took a kind of a fork in the road, and then got into transportation a little bit. Now, I changed MOSs in 2018, so that's 6 years ago, as a senior warrant officer, going from a maintenance warrant officer into transportation. I was the old guy at the school with these 20-year-olds, but get re-educated because my full-time job required that with Nebraska. So that diversity with maintenance and transportation, then that morphs into safety and safety always with everything that we do. So that diverse background, I think, really enhanced my opportunities and my skill set to get into this job.
I like the way that you described it's not a straight path, and it came about because of diversity and the jobs that you held and those additional duties like a unit movement officer. And I got the cold chills when you said unit movement officer, and it comes about because I was the unit movement officer both to Iraq and back on my deployment as a first lieutenant. And that means you pick up everything in your entire unit and you ship it, and you coordinate all the logistics from point A to point W and every letter in between. And you're really responsible for that load. So with this diverse background and the different pathways you took to being both a CW5 and the state safety officer, have you picked up any professional designations or military citations for safety along the way? Anything that some of our listeners would relate to in the civilian world?
Yeah, a few. So the CW5 state safety officer in Nebraska, it's not a specific military occupation specialty. It's not an MOS that we have. So they grab somebody who's got a specific skill set, at that time. And so very fortunate to be around and have that and have this opportunity to promote into this. But some criteria was, a 6-week course down in Lower Alabama, Fort Rucker, Fort Novosel now, a 6-week course, a ground safety officer course. So that's kind of an associate's degree, so to speak, in safety. As we go down there, you got to have a foundation of experience and of safety background. But that GSOC is an additional skill identifier in the military that I had to have. Along with that are multiple OSHA courses. The OSHA 30 general industry is a good one to have. OSHA 511 is what we had. Along with, with transportation, a little bit of oversight that we pretty broad in here. We manage the explosive safety program with our arms rooms and our ammo supply point and things like that. Range safety, we have oversight of that. And then hazardous materials are some of the courses that we have. But GSOC is primarily the foundation. And they want us to work towards that, what I would call a master's degree in safety. The CP12 is a kind of a civilian recognized certified professional in safety out there to work in an organization. So I don't have that yet, working towards it, not required, but maybe some folks, some of my peers in other states, they work towards that. And then when retirement comes, then they open that next chapter, and it's just pretty appealing.
Well, thank you. For our listeners, would you expand on that GSOC? What's that acronym?
Yeah, the GSOC is a ground safety officer course. It is it's something in the Army. There's two versions of it. It's really for safety professionals in the Army. It's probably about as close to acquiring an MOS and military occupational specialty in safety as we get, in the military. So it's down at the U.S. Army Safety Center, taught by some fantastic professionals that are down there. Very broad. It's for folks maybe at a state level and maybe a level below, primarily is who it is, maybe at a brigade level where those folks go. But it's very vast. How do we manage a safety program for the military, whether it's at a unit, whether it's at a state? How do we handle any mishaps and investigations that go on? How do we conduct an investigation in case there's a serious accident? What's that protocol? That's a great networking opportunity, an educational opportunity, and multiple other things. Again, with dealing with aviation and ground mishaps and processes and programs, and then how do we interface with the U.S. Army, United States Army Safety Center, the CRC, down at Fort Rucker, Fort Novosel.
Well, it sounds a lot to me. A couple things. There's one, when you started mentioning hazmat, Mr. Kenny Ray on the call here, he is our hazmat guru. But when you start talking about hauling, high explosives and ammunition and moving stuff around, that's a different ball of paperwork and coordination across the state. And those. I think you got a strong career outside of the military when you decide that you want to move on and go to a different career path. It seems like you got a pretty solid background. Now, let's transition here. If you could wear two hats at one time, your state safety officer hat and your defense movement coordinator hat from some of your most recent positions, let's talk about coming into the summertime here and the season of the annual trainings. You have been in a solid, long career, and I bet that you've seen a thing or two. When you're wearing those hats, what concerns you the most about this season of equipment going up and down the road?
There's a number of things. We talked offline a little bit, but what comes, certainly what comes to mind is we as service members, we as soldiers, we're professionals, but we're professionals in many different things. are not always professional truck drivers that are out there. And we're a big demographic, multiple ages, different skill sets that are out there. But when it becomes, annual training time, AT we call it, is a big ta-da with the reserve component. It's 2 weeks. Generally, it's in the summer. It's when college is out. It's in between in the summertime when the weather is a little more agreeable. So, and it's a time when a unit comes together to go train. Generally, it's away from their home station, away from their armories in small town Nebraska. So oftentimes we're going to different parts of the states, and then we're going to other states outside of there. So the training requirements require us to travel, and part of it's the training mission, and part of it is the activity of actually driving over the road with our equipment, exercising our equipment. Maintenance is training, and driving is training as well. So it's a big event. And sometimes we can do the same thing in our armories, but we want to go to Camp Guernsey, Wyoming to do the same thing, because we get that leadership training along the way, get that driver's training experience and so on. But so talking back to the professionals, we show up on Saturday morning in our uniform, and I might be a college kid, I might be a factory worker, or I might be a stay-at-home parent. And then I show up on Saturday morning for that annual training, driving my Honda Civic, brand new with the all the safety features on it, the backup camera and the collision prevention items on there, and all those kind of things. But it's that negative habit transfer that kind of concerns us. We get so used to our cars that we drive 28 days out of the month, and we jump into, it might be a Humvee, it might be a box truck, it might be a combination vehicle. And it's a little bit of a transition. We've all done that, whether even internally in the family, if you have multiple cars in the household, driving my car or my wife's car, it's a little bit different. The gadgets and everything's in a little bit different place. So we jump in those vehicles after a good convoy brief, and we kick the tires, and we're doing our preventative checks on that. And oftentimes these armories are in the middle of town, and the legacy armories are smack dab in the old town Lincoln or Kearney or Omaha, South Omaha Readiness Centers right there in the middle of town. And we pull out that gate, and I haven't driven this combination vehicle maybe in a month, maybe it's been a year or so since I've been in this, and that gets my dander up. Whether you're a seasoned driver or a new driver. So just pulling out the gate is sometimes a challenge in these areas. And, we all know what right looks like, but sometimes other traffic is out there. Sometimes there's some, traffic lights that kind of separate us from that convoy group of vehicles that are trying to get onto the interstate, and trying to meet that start point time and get going, meet our time hacks so we don't slow anybody else down. And then, just getting on the road and getting lined up and getting in that right exit lane. So we're going in the right direction to wherever we might be. And then once we get on the road, that's a challenge too, because we got a long road ahead. And what we need to emphasize and trying to emphasize too is that driver's training and the crew combination that we have. Generally in a convoy, we try to do that appropriate mix of a less experienced driver with a more experienced driver in that vehicle. And sometimes it's hard to get that combination, and try to emphasize in those scenarios where we're pulling out the gate in high traffic, that experienced driver should be the one behind the wheel, for that mentorship and for that setting the example, and really just for the function of that. Every convoy, if it's organized, after 1 hour, we're required to take a 15-minute break, and that's all scheduled ahead of time. So that first experienced driver isn't going to have to drive the whole duration. Let's get them out of those dicey congested areas and do that. We try to emphasize that. Too often, though, we have the less experienced driver right out of the chute. The senior driver might be, hey, I'll just tell you where to turn. I'll navigate and help you out. But that's kind of a bad recipe, I think. And it's, too often, there's a lot of distractions that go along with that too. So we try to get that right combination. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
You've you used negative habit transfer a little while back as you were talking, and describing that we've got a formation of people that are coming from all different backgrounds, and some of them are truck drivers, some of them are college students, some of them are junior, senior in high school, or probably in their senior year, that are doing drill on the weekends, that maybe haven't been to their MOS specific school yet. Maybe they've only attended their basic training, and really talking how you navigate and you manage that. And so the experienced driver, matching them up with some lesser experienced drivers, and then slowly exposing them to what they may encounter. And as a previous commander that has had soldiers, which were the best, if any of them are listening, I don't want to talk bad, but we have hit a few gates. We have hit a few gates in my day and taken out a couple mailboxes. And the size difference, that negative habit transfer coming from our personally owned vehicles into a much, much larger, much less technology involved military piece of equipment. That's a profound thought. And it's something that I'd like our listeners to really think about. Our safety directors that are listening and our truck drivers that are listening, this is their profession. They drive these rigs every day. And so now transitioning into the next piece, and you've touched on it lightly, and so maybe interweave it a little bit more into this kind of next piece, is the pre, during, and post inspections, and some maintenance things that are there, and touch on it lightly enough to just say, hey, this is what we're doing on some of these stops. But you're talking about Nebraska and how Nebraska will mobilize across multiple other states to get to their annual training. And they're going up 2-laners. They're going up highways that don't have shoulders. They're going down the interstate. There's convoy speeds that we're not going to get into too much, but listeners can imagine that, hey, these rigs don't travel normal speeds. But unique differences between states. I can imagine that by state, we've got different jobs and specific functions, and we may have an infantry unit. We may have a artillery unit. We may have a trucking company that could have, and in that trucking company, they could have full-blown tractor trailer combinations, flat decks. They could have other nomenclatures or different types of military hauling transportation type trucks. But what characteristics of these military vehicles can you hit on? And what could our listeners expect when they come upon a military convoy? What is going to be outside the norm that our truckers are going to encounter when they come upon them, that they need to recognize for their safety, the safety of other people driving up and down the road, and for the safety of the military personnel?
We use the term convoy relatively loosely, where we see a combination of vehicles, or a series of Army vehicles out there. Technically a convoy is going to be 6 or more vehicles that are traveling from one starting point to an end point within 1 hour, or 10 within 1 hour, but generally it's 6 to 10. So if you see a series of vehicles, this is an organized convoy, so there's certain time hacks. They're communicating with each other, and they're supposed to meet certain time hacks to deconflict with any other military convoys that are out there. The intent is that we don't clog up rest areas, or we don't clog up the interstate system. So we're trying to spread those out. So, when we put a convoy together, the pre-checks, of course, we talked a little bit about deadlining and the pre-checks. That convoy commander needs to be mindful of convoy speeds and how fast are we going to be out there. Of course, we want to get to our final destination to make mission, but oftentimes there's different types of vehicles that are out there. There's a Humvee and there's combination vehicles. Well, what's going to be a little bit slower, especially if something's loaded up, is going to be our heavies. So those heavies are going to move a little bit slower, and they're not going to be quite as agile. So we try to put those towards the front of that 6 to 10 vehicle convoy, and then they dictate the speed of that convoy. So all military vehicles, no matter how loaded, we're supposed to maintain a speed of minimum of 45 miles an hour, over the road. And coincidentally, on the U.S. interstate system, the strategic highway network, the minimum speed on the interstate is 45. And that's the intent of the interstate out there. The Eisenhower interstate system was developed for military movements from coast to coast and for border to border. So there's still a minimum speed that's out there, and that is to help accommodate our military convoys that are out there. So those convoys are trying to meet a time hack. They're trying to keep up to a convoy speed. We never want to exceed a posted speed limit. Now, we don't want to lose touch with that last vehicle or the first vehicle. Certain distances that are in there that I know it's a hot topic for the convoy commander. We need to continually emphasize to keep to accommodate and to work with that civilian traffic out there. We need to keep appropriate convoy distances. So I think by textbook, it's, if you're 45 miles an hour or so, 4 to 8 seconds in between vehicles, and then as we speed up, we increase that. In my mind, in between the vehicle in front of me, we should always allow enough room for an 18-wheeler to get in between us. So whether we're on a 2-lane road or we're on the interstate, running down the 4-lane interstate, always allow enough room that a semi can pass us, in the left lane. And then if they're moving a little bit slower, they can slide in and in between our convoys, kind of infiltrate our convoy, which is just fine, and let the faster traffic go by, and then they can jump back out into that left lane.
So it is acceptable, and you plan for infiltration of other vehicles to bounce in and around and move through the convoy as they need to at their travel speed. You're traveling slower, and so you will allow room just for large vehicles, 18-wheelers, to get in and around. Is there signage that's on the vehicles? Is there lights? And one thing that I always a little bit embarrassing, but sometimes I didn't focus too much on what I consider to be a minor detail. The letters that or things that get drawn on the side of the military vehicle with like a white chalk or stuck on the side with tape. Is that a permit number that's there? Does it have any importance to anybody outside of the military?
Yeah, great point. So kind of some of the signage, Jim, is as you mentioned, if you were to come up on a serial of, it's going to be 6 or more vehicles, and you see a convoy ahead, and I'm a civilian vehicle, I'm going to think, all right, I've got at least 6 vehicles that are traveling in the same direction. Sometimes it's up to 20 vehicles inside that serial. So I know I've got my work cut out for me, and they're going to be traveling relatively the same rate of speed. So if there's a yellow sign on the back vehicle that says convoy ahead, And it's not a recovery. It's not a tow truck looking vehicle. You're kind of in the middle of that convoy where you got to have at least 6 vehicles there. So, you've got so your work cut out for you to pass those vehicles. And that the last vehicle should have a flashing amber light, and that just kind of awareness. Hey, there's some Army guys out here. We're moving a little bit slower than civilian traffic that's there. Convoy commander should have he's the guy. He's the person in charge of that convoy. Sometimes they're at the front setting the pace. Sometimes they're in the middle or in the back, and they have a sign on the front. They also have some little fancy green flags off to the side that identify who they are. So they'll have flags, and the first and the last vehicle in that convoy will have the flags off the bumpers as well. So Jim, you mentioned that the chalk on the side of the maybe written kind of hastily on the side of a door, and maybe on the last vehicle on the hood and on the first vehicle on the hood. So that is a designator. That is it's not really a license. It's a convoy clearance number. Our military vehicles are identified with bumper numbers that some of us can kind of interpret. Sometimes it's the state's affiliated with it, and then maybe a down trace unit that's with that all the way down to whatever that truck number is. So sometimes you can identify a state, but if it's an active duty or the Marine Corps or Air Force, it's a little bit different. But just the same, if they're in a convoy, there's going to be an associated number that's chalked on the side of it. So the first 2 characters are going to be the state that it comes from, Annie, Nebraska, and so on, the 2-digit code for that. And then that third digit's going to be whatever year it is. And then it's a bit of a sequence. So it's the sequence 000125, meaning it's the 125th convoy that Nebraska has put together, whether it's for the Nebraska Guard, the Army Reserves, the Marines, or the Air Force that travels through the state, originates in that state. It's all done out of the Army's DMC office. Then that last character is generally an alpha character, and C as in Charlie is a traditional convoy. But if there's an H in there, that means we're hauling hazmat. And if there's an E at the end of it, that means we're hauling explosives, and that should accommodate or accompany, the placarding on the side of that vehicle that we're doing that. So it's kind of in code, but that's how we identify, where that originated at.
So when you guys are hauling hazardous material, you're fully placarding up as well.
Yeah. So DOT, absolutely. With the hazmat, we have civilian certified hazmat certifiers that do the civilian course, and any amount of either it's hazmat or ammunition, we do placard up in accordance with the department, DOT, I'll say, and the transportation regulation as well. So we follow rules and regulations of the road as well, even though we're green.
That's good info. Is there any type of slinky effects? You mentioned, and there's a little bit of a tempo to the start stop, and I'm going to bring in a little bit of us Nebraska guys. We talk about in other podcasts that we talk about, some school zones. We talk about, hey, this is heavy ag industry time of year. You're going to encounter tractors and large equipment on the roadways. And so part of that is there's a tractor's not going 30 miles down the road typically, right? If you're inconvenienced by a tractor going down the road, it's not a long inconvenience, and it's not always the safe option to try to pass, especially on 2 lanes and where you can't see their signals, things of that nature. So you did discuss that there's a tempo to these serials or these convoys, and they meet time hacks, and they've got checkpoints that they've got to get to. And it's really not that long. And so I guess I would behoove listeners to not accept the challenge of, hey, I got 6 to 10 vehicles ahead of me. I'm going to try to get past all of these as quickly and as efficiently as possible. They will be turning off relatively soon. Is there slinky effects, do military convoys still find a spot or a stretch of road and pull all the way into the ditch to take a hasty rest stop?
I maybe mentioned earlier, there is a regulatory requirement after 1 hour. We're required to take a 15-minute break. It's, a personal relief break, number one, in the morning, and then it's a load check to make sure not too much has moved. It allows a little bit additional time, so that the Defense Movement Coordinator, the DMC, as we build those convoys as requested by the unit, we map it out, kind of our version of just the mapping of the roads that are out there. We try to find an appropriate rest area, whether it be a DOT rest area alongside of an interstate or a highway, where we can fit that group into that rest area. Sometimes it's a truck stop along the way where we can run in there. We're not fueling up, but we can kind of rally up there, that 6 to 10 or up to 15 to 20 vehicles that are in there, and then for 15 minutes and get in and out, make that break, check that load. We try to avoid any hasty stops alongside any road. Now, however, we do take that into consideration when we're building convoys. The military, the Department of Defense has the strategic highway network that's out there. It's like 65,000 miles of highway that's out there that's recommended for military convoys. I mentioned the interstate system, but there's some highways that are part of that too. So we try to stay on that strategic highway network. Those generally are shouldered highways as well, to accommodate these pull off the side of the road in case we need to. It's a little more forgiving. It's a lot safer for our folks if we had to, between points A and B, and during that first hour, taking that 15-minute break, and then every 2 hours after that, we were required to take a 10-minute break. So our halts are very, very deliberate, should be very deliberate if it's a whole convoy as a whole. If we see 15 vehicles alongside the road, that's bad planning. That's a bad, it should never happen. Occasionally there's a maintenance concern, or we got to pull off. So vehicle number 6 pulls as a maintenance concern. They will pull off to the side of the road. They'll communicate, and maybe a vehicle, a recovery vehicle, or a maintenance vehicle behind them will pull off to help. But the whole convoy should never pull off to the side of the road to tend to one vehicle that may have broken down. We have a trail party at the end of the large convoy that's kind of up to them. They're the cleanup crew to help fix it if we can, or put it on a hook and bring it to a safe haven as close as possible, another armory, or some sort of place where it can be tended to or picked up for a recovery at a later time.
Real good information there. And the career that I had, especially when I transitioned into being an officer and given leadership of a platoon, then company, risk assessments were a big part of mission planning. I would not say that we were risk adverse, but we wanted to assess what possibly could happen or go wrong, and plan for that accordingly. We would do hazard analysis, and I'm using these words that at the time weren't so clear to me, but now in my profession, it's extremely clear. The focus that we put on training, and I had an old company first sergeant that said, and this is a little grotesque, but in the Army, training to take lives, as in war, as in combat, training to take lives is not worth taking a life in training. And so we would overemphasize, and we would have safety stops. And I joke a little bit about, we had a right to know center, which was our yellow book full of safety data sheets on the wall, what chemicals we had. But OSHA specific training or the oversight of what's going on. And everybody was a safety officer. And from the logistics, I had more trepidation about convoying that command versus when I was in command of a special operations company where we were airborne. It almost felt more dangerous with this big equipment up and down the road with soldiers, boots on the ground, in and around moving equipment than it did jumping out of an airplane. And so in closing here, as the state safety officer, what keeps you up at night when the soldiers are on the road? What is one of your biggest worries? And what do you do from a risk assessment, hazard analysis to attempt to control those worries?
Yeah, great point. It's there's a lot of things, Jim, that we as senior people, I'm an old guy in the Army now, and we're lucky we make it through, and those experiences make great wisdom. And but to your point, being the state safety officer, we go and visit units, we visit facilities, and we do safety inspections and sit down with their unit safety officers. And no matter what unit it is, whether it's a combat arms, whether it's an airborne unit, whether it's an aviation unit or a transportation unit, one of our kind of pre-interviews that we do before that inspection is, what's the most dangerous thing in this unit? What's the most dangerous thing you do? You guys are airborne infantry. You jump out of aircraft or you fly aircraft. Everybody's answer after a short pause is convoying. It's driving. It's driving these vehicles. It's that transition from our civilian vehicles, our civilian careers, into jumping into that big truck, and whether it's going down the road, or it's going across the state, it's just driving those vehicles. One thing, a kind of a dynamic we see on the eastern side of the state, a little bit more in metro, that in the last several years is driver's licenses and the experience of our young soldiers coming in. When I guess I grew up in a rural community where we were driving tractors and farm equipment, and no matter if you lived in town, you went up to Uncle Buck's or Cousin Judy's, farm out there, and we're helping on the farm in the summer. What we see in Lincoln and Omaha in the metro areas, there's a lot of our service members that are coming in that have limited experience driving a vehicle, a car, and a lot of them don't even have a civilian driver's license. They're either take public transportation, or they maybe have a family member that has always driven them around. And we have that just that assumption that hey, you're going to have that experience. So it's that driver's training program that is really challenging for that commander to ensure. Commander and all leaders involved of who we're putting behind the wheel of that 3 to 30 ton vehicle that's out there on the roads, and that right combination. And so many other things get glossed over. We're trying to make mission. We're trying to get there, and as commanders, we got to get to the final destination so we can do our training, but we lose sight of that process of prepping for the convoy, driving, and the maintenance that goes along with it. That's really what keeps me up, and it's not just from my cubicle here thinking, this is what I think it is. It's from those service members and the leadership in those units that gets them concerned about it as well. These vehicles, we want to blame it on a lot of things, and it's just really hard to get focused on that. And then that annual training time is around, and then there we are on the road. But trust me, we've got a good program. We have professionals in those vehicles, and but just like anything, it's kind of like driving around a U-Haul or a Ryder truck driving down the interstate. They've only been in that thing for maybe a day or two, moving across the country. proceed with those military vehicles the same way. They're good. They know what they're doing, but sometimes a little unpredictable. So trying to get the right person behind the wheel, the right combination, and trying to get to the mission and get it there and back safely is what really concerns me, is that over the road driving.
1636 is when the first National Guard militia regiment was stood up in Massachusetts. And since that time, Army, Air, National Guard, reservists have served both the community and country. Their versatility to respond to domestic emergencies, overseas combat missions, counter-drug efforts, and reconstruction missions have helped form this country and been extremely versatile, especially across many fronts in the United States, from national disasters to overseas war. So, Mr. Reicks, personally, I want to thank you for the time that you've given us today, for sharing just your experience throughout your long career and in your current position as a state safety officer. I'd like to remind the listeners that these National Guard folks, they are neighbors and friends and coworkers, and they are performing a service to the country and to the state. From Mike and Kenny, thank you guys for joining us today on this episode of Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety. We'll talk to you next time.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.